Welcome back. We're so excited you're with us. We're talking about ways to increase your happiness. And ultimately, that's what brain warriors do. I mean, they fight for happiness because they realize it's a moral obligation that how happy or unhappy you are impacts everybody around you. And you have more to say.
So in our last episode, the end of last week, we were talking about relationships, and relationships can really impact your happiness. If they're good, they really impact your happiness in a positive way, and if they're not, they can impact your happiness in a negative way. And we were talking about our relationship. I mean, you really increase my happiness. You're sort of the yin to my yang, if you will. You're calming and grounding, and you are very Pollyanna. You see what's good in the world. And that's good for me because I tend to see what's not right in the world. And I love that. But what we were talking about was noticing what we like more than what we don't like. And I was talking about with you and Chloe how I do that. But one of the things that helps me, I was talking about winning the battle or the war. So sometimes you lose the battle, but you win the war. Because it's like I step back and I ask myself, what is important? This relationship is more important to me than pretty much anything else. It's more important to me than anything else that we could argue about, right? So if I remember that, then I step back and it's not worth it. This rarely is something worth me arguing and holding on to with you or with Chloe or anyone else in our family that I want to have a close relationship with. And you just always have to ask. And one thing I always ask myself is, does this have eternal value? Is this ultimately going to have eternal value? Is this going to make things better eternally or even now? In our family, in our relationship? Is this going to make us happier and have more love?
And that goes with question 7. Live your life based on clearly defined values, purpose, and goals. And the question is, does it fit? Does my behavior fit the values, purpose, and goals I have for my life? And ultimately, that leads to the question you just mentioned. Does this have eternal value in the context of what I want? I think the most successful people in life, successful in relationships, successful at work, successful with their money, successful with their physical, emotional, spiritual health, is actually know what they want. So they define it, they write it down, and then you're actually telling your brain what you want. Because if you can see it, your brain will help you make it happen. But going back to the ACE score, if you have a lot of childhood trauma that activated your nervous system, and it's really not about what you want, it's about what you don't want, then your life is going to basically be on guard against bad things happening.
But that's why that question helps me. Does it have eternal value? Because when I get really freaked out, having something bigger than me to focus on really helps me let it go. Does this have eternal value? Then I can like step back and go, oh, wait a minute. Very little has eternal value if it's something minor that I'm, an argument or something that I'm focusing on right now that is not helpful. It rarely has eternal value. And something bigger than myself helps me let it go. Does that make sense? Because we're all going to die eventually. So what are you doing with your time here?
Who bicker often, it's about the little stuff.
The little stuff.
And it becomes a bad habit. So in the last episode, we talked about negative thinking can be a bad habit. Well, how you interact with each other, is it a good habit? Does it serve and elevate your relationship? Or is it a bad habit that maybe you picked up from your parents or earlier relationships that you had, and whining, complaining, withholding turns into a pattern of behavior that creates distance. And so what are you doing today that creates closeness? versus what are you doing today that creates separation. And I don't want you to be judgmental. I want you to be curious. And because if you're curious, then you just ask yourself, well, does it fit? Does it fit the goals you have? Which is why I just think goals are foundational. Almost every successful business has a detailed business plan.
Mm-hmm.
They know what they want. Like at Amen Clinics and BrainMD, we have a one-page strategic plan. What are our core values? And what are we going to do this quarter, the next 90 days, the next year, the next 3 to 5 years? But people don't ever think about that for themselves and for their relationships, which I think is just, it's foundational to success. And when you went to the Tony Robbins Date with Destiny, I know that was part of what you guys did, right?
Yeah, we had a life plan. There were a couple of things that really helped. I think having that life plan and understanding your values was really critical. That just changed so many things for me. The other thing that really helped me, especially with relationships, because we're talking a lot about relationships and eternal value, as far as happiness goes, Byron Katie has a saying, defense is the first act of war. And that's the opposite of happiness. Defense is the first act of war. And when I really understood that, it's like, oh, that means when you're defensive, you have to be right. You have to win. And so why do you need to, like, is it really worth it? And when I really understood that defense is the first act of war, if you just drop the rope, does it matter? Except it does matter in your happiness, right? I'm sorry are probably two of the most powerful words in the world. Just drop the rope.
I mean, sometimes it does matter.
Big things, yes. If it has eternal value, boundaries are important. But I'm talking about day-to-day, menial
it's like
things.
Really pick your battle.
Right. The battle or the war.
Yeah. And brain type matters here, which is the first question in the happiness challenge is know your type. An interesting example of it this week. And this is happening so often and breaking my heart that families are fighting over the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And one of, someone we know, a youngster, she was sort of deciding to get it or not. And the family put a lot of pressure on her to do it and almost excluded her from events because she didn't get it. And I'm hearing this
a lot.
More and more. Actually, in my own family, between my two girls.
And even in marriages.
One is really anxious about the virus, the other not at all. And
family members saying,
and they haven't seen each other.
Right. You can't see the rest of the family. We've been hearing a lot of this. You can't come over. You can't see us ever unless you get it. And it's really hard.
But the point I'm trying to make is I had her brain. And I know she's a type 3. She's a persistent brain type. Her cingulate works too hard. And so never tell type 3s what to do. Because if you tell them what to do, they won't do it. It's like they sort of wear Teflon. And if you tell them what to do, they will do the opposite. People like this. So you have to know about the brain type of the people you're dealing with. BrainHealthAssessment.com will help you know. And I introduced her to a word called sovereignty, which is basically you need decision-making over your life. So if someone would give you an option, you're so much better than if someone tells you what to do. Now, you're not like that, thank God. But I have been with people who are like that, and that was a
I don't like being told what to do.
Lesson. You don't like to be told what to do. But your first word isn't always no.
No.
And for people who are type 3, it's like no matter what you say to them, their first response is no. My dad was like that. Mm-hmm. Like no matter what, the answer to any question was no. And if you're with someone like that, it's very important to just go, we could do this or we could do that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to do? And give them choices. And you've often heard me say, you do a hit and run,
mm-hmm.
which is you plant a seed and then you let it go. Plant a seed and then you let it go.
So effective for parenting teens. Oh my gosh.
Well, and Chloe is someone who needs sovereignty.
Right.
Right? If you
try and tell her what to do.
Surprise her.
Yeah.
It's like,
oh, I could never throw her a surprise party. Ever. So yeah, really important to know those things, because it's easy to look at them and say they're ungrateful. It's easy to look at people like that and say, they're stubborn or ungrateful and label them. But if you really understand how their brain works, you can also go, okay, I know that surprises make them anxious, is what it really is.
Well, and on the surface, they appear selfish,
mm-hmm.
but they're really not selfish. They're rigid.
Yeah.
Their thinking is rigid. So if you have an autistic child, you know exactly what I'm talking about, or somebody who has OCD or OCD-like tendencies.
Right.
Anyways, a lot of neuroscience for starting out the week, but we hope this is helpful to you. When we come back, we're going to talk more about eternal value and relationships. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are talking about happiness and relationships. And we've been talking about, does it have eternal value? How do you make your relationships happier? And I love this topic. So I think before we dig in, you've got a couple of reviews.
I do. Susan in Denver. Who knew? The podcast is full of insightful wisdom for a variety of aspects you might not connect to brain health, like relationships. So refreshing to know they are looking into new ways to diagnose and treat various brain issues. I love it. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. So we're in the middle of our happiness challenge when we are filming this. And this week, we're really focused on neuroscience secret number 7, which is live your life every day based on clearly defined values, purpose, and goals. And the question is, does it fit? Does my behavior today fit the goals I have for my life? Does my eating fit? Does my sleeping fit? Do the comments I make to my spouse fit? Or the comments I make to my children when I teach parenting? The very first thing I do is I have parents write down, what kind of parent do you want to be?
Right.
And what kind of child do you want to raise? So important.
But that's important in relationships too. It's like, what kind of partner do I want to be? And what kind of partner do I want to have? And in the last episode, we talked about, I made a comment, the Byron Katie phrase that I love, defense is the first act of war. That doesn't mean not to have boundaries. In fact, if you are clear about your boundaries and they're attached to your values, you don't really need to fight. Because if people continuously violate your boundaries, there's no fighting. It's just, this isn't working, right? So defense is the first act of war, I think actually makes you happier. You're clear about what you need and want. And that's what, you don't need to fight, because that's what I think brings unhappiness.
Because people change. What you said, it just made me think. So people get married in their 20s or maybe early 30s later than when my parents got married when they were 18 and 20. And their hormones were healthier. And then stress, starting a business, starting a job, having a baby or two, and the hormones are now all over the place. And one person's really interested in sex, the other person's not interested at all in sex. And it can go either way. I've seen it with husbands and wives go either way. And then all of a sudden people are feeling lost, disconnected. And even though they want to be close, one person is pushing the other person away. And there's loneliness and distance and unhappiness. And that's why all 7 of these secrets are so important, right? And secret number 2, you got to get your brain right. And if your hormones aren't right, your brain's not right, right? So you just wonder how many people are suffering in their relationships. I mean, what do you say about progesterone?
Oh, I'd be on the evening news without it. And not everyone can take it. I understand that. But it just, for me, it really, really helps. It's sort of like your brain's natural Valium. So it really makes a difference for me. It takes that edge off. And I've needed it for about 12 years now. Like when I went into perimenopause, I felt it. I felt that edginess, that prickliness come out, certain times of the month.
Well, it's a good point, because what a lot of people don't know is about a decade before women go into menopause,
right,
about a decade, their progesterone level starts to drop, and then they become prickly. They become anxious. They have trouble sleeping, and they start drinking more, and they start using antidepressants more, and they start using sleeping pills.
But they're not fixing the actual
more, but they're not actually fixing the actual issue. And so, as we talk about developing clear goals in relationships, if you're rolling your eyes at us and go, well, he won't touch me, or she's shut me out, getting your hormones checked, getting your brain healthy, we think of hormones like Miracle-Gro for your brain, is just so essential. If you come together, and we recommend this, and develop the one-page miracle for your relationship. What do we want?
What do you want?
What do we want? And I've always been so grateful to you, because you're very affectionate with me. And I know sometimes it's when you don't feel like it, but it's because our relationship is at the top of the list.
And that's the thing, because you especially women, you go through all these changes with your hormones, and it's crazy. But if you know what you want, because if you want to be divorced, then okay, then behave like that, and it's fine, and you're going to end up probably divorced. If you don't want to be divorced, if you know you want to have a good relationship, you want to have a close relationship, there are things you do in your relationship because you know it's going to bring you closer. There are things you do that you do because you want to have a good relationship. You do them because it's an investment in your relationship. And it's really important to be clear about what you want.
And not be driven by your impulses.
Or just because you have these random feelings,
Just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true or whether or not it's helpful. And so staying purposeful, helpful, and it's not what other people want. I mean, this is really important when we have people develop their goals based on values and purpose. It's not my goals for you. I mean, yes, I want everybody to have a healthy brain, but it's really, what do you want? And is your behavior going to get you what you want? So if you want a healthy body, is the ice cream every night, a bowl or two, going to get you what you want? Probably not. And so then you need to build a new habit. This summer, I think it's going to start July 15th. We're going to do an eliminating bad habits challenge. So excited.
I like that. That's a good one.
About that. And it just, but it's always starts with, what do you want? And does it fit? I love that phrase. I remember Jose, the sex addict I saw from the Dr. Phil show. and he'd cheated on his wife 8 times in the 4 years they'd been together. And I remember what Dr. Phil said. He said, my dad said, if you see a rat, there's probably 50 more of them behind the wall. And anyways, this is one of the very first things I got him to say, does it fit? He wanted to be married, and he was really clear. I don't want my children growing up in a broken home like I grew up in a broken home. And so we planted, does it fit? And 2 words that go with that, then what? If I do this, then what happens? If I say this, then what happens? And he was able to remain faithful to his wife. I mean, it's just so proud of him. These strategies can help you. So what else comes to mind when it comes to eternal value in relationships?
Well, I think we've talked about saying I'm sorry, which I think is really important. People get so stuck on their pride and not being able to, they have to be right, or they can't admit that, they're wrong about something. And the question is why? Why do people need to be right? Why do they need to stick to something when they know it's not helpful or it's not right?
Why do they need to say, I told you so?
Yeah, well, that's a little different. But anyways,
we were playing with that last night, and I went, oh, that's narcissism.
It's like when you tell someone something's going to happen and they just don't listen. It's like, but I told you that was going to happen. Like, it's like a parenting thing almost. Like, it's like, why?
I told you so could be a habit.
Yeah, it's a habit. It's a bad habit.
It's a bad habit.
So anyways, yeah, but being able to say, I'm sorry, I think it's one thing that just ends an argument so fast. It can end an argument so quickly. So
wait. Are you saying that the person that says, I'm sorry,
has the power
to control?
They hold on and they don't do it because they don't want to because they think they're giving up power, when in fact they're the one with the power, because they can end the relationship.
Have you been wrong in your life?
Many times.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and it's very freeing to say it. It's very freeing to go, all right, I screwed up.
Would you, those of you listening, are there decisions in your life that you would make differently with the information you have now? And I think everybody will go, heck yes.
Yes and no.
Well, there's a whole bunch I would have made different now than I wouldn't, maybe be here with you.
It's just that I like who I am now.
Yes, and I like who I am most of the time. But of course I would make big decisions,
I made bonehead decisions
differently. And if you're mature enough to admit that, then it's okay to say, I'm sorry. Because all of us, everybody I know, has made mistakes. And when the person says sorry, and they mean it, you become human. You become more easy to relate to. And holding on to having to be right, it's part of this political divide we live in, and it's toxic. We can do better. I want you to do better in your relationships. Stay with us.
Your brain is always listening. I am thrilled to be your guide and show you how to tame your dragons so that you can have the happiness, peace, and the relationships you deserve.
Welcome back. We are here in the middle of our happiness challenge and talking a lot about question 6. Am I noticing what I like about my relationships more than what I don't? Am I reinforcing what I like or dislike? And does it have eternal value based on clearly defined values, purpose, and goals? And as we try to do as often as we can, is this thing called Brain in the News, where we look at the news and we go, well, what relates to the brain? And more, we're going to go, what relates to happiness and the brain? And just this month, a brand new book came out called The Neuroscience of Depression. And it's written by scientists all over the world, including me. How brain SPECT imaging informs the diagnosis and treatment of mood disorders with a number of my colleagues at Amen Clinics. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I write about is depression is like chest pain that has many different causes. And too often, and during the pandemic, depression tripled. From February, it was 8.5%. August, it was at 28%. I mean, truly horrifying. And the pharmaceutical industry was really the big winner of the pandemic in so many ways. But depression can be biological, can be psychological, can be social, with the isolation, the loneliness, the fear, and can be spiritual, where you feel disconnected.
Right, and that's a good point, because as we're talking about happiness in relationships, it's pretty hard to focus on making, sacrifices of yourself and focusing on a relationship and being happy when you're depressed. I mean, you talk to anybody who's depressed or been depressed, and they'll tell you it is a pain like no other pain. It's an emotional pain that you can't get away from. So it's really hard to focus on other things when you're going through that. So that makes it pretty tough to focus on someone else or something else. And so many things can cause it. So what if you've had a head injury, or you've had something, or you're emotionally, you're depressed because of something going on in your life that's emotional, and now, you can't, that's the reason you can't be happy.
And when you can't explain the depression,
yes,
then it could be your thyroid. It could be mold exposure. It could be you have Lyme disease. And that's why the imaging work we do at Amen Clinics is just so critical and so important, that if you don't look, you don't know, that we really have to stop this. And part of why we call the podcast The Brain Warrior's Way is we're in a war for the health of our brains, and we really want to change the paradigm from making diagnoses based on symptom clusters. So when you were diagnosed with depression, how did the doctor diagnose you?
I really don't. He just talked to me for a little while, and he prescribed Prozac. That's all I remember. I don't really remember.
You, if I remember right, actually went in.
I went in telling him I wanted Prozac.
Right.
I didn't really.
Because you read a book.
I read a book. I wanted Prozac. I was in so much pain.
Was it listening to Prozac?
Yeah, I think so. And I was in so much emotional pain that I just couldn't wait long enough. I couldn't wait anymore. And so I went in there. He was like Doogie Howser. This kid was so young. He was a resident. And I'm like, I know what I need. Like, I have a Prozac deficiency or something. I need this. And so I was not really going to take no for an answer. I mean, to be honest with you. So, but he just asked me a few questions and wrote me a prescription. Like, there was no, like, well, let's talk about this. Like, let's figure out what's going on. Like, nothing.
Even though you just had your thyroid.
And was going through radiation treatments and and had lost my job and lost it. I had to file for bankruptcy. I dropped out of school. My mother was going through brain surgery, all of that.
From our fourth circle.
Biopsychosocial, spiritual.
All of them.
We're bankrupt.
All of them.
All of them.
And so Prozac, maybe can take the edge off.
No, maybe numb.
Can take the edge off. and actually disinhibit you,
Yeah,
which
a
you
little too much.
talk about in The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. It's a great story.
It could have ruined my life.
It could have ruined your life. And people just aren't taking this four circle approach. So if you think of anybody that has cancer, there's a biological effect of that chemotherapy on your brain. And the chronic stress hormones of just facing your own death. They're clearly psychological issues. You begin to wrestle with the death dragon and the grief and loss dragon, because at that time you lost a lot. The hopeless and helpless dragon. So those are the dragons that drive depression. And then socially, from losing a job, having to file for bankruptcy, and spiritually, which is, why is this happening to me? And what does my
Well, and I thought if there's a God, he doesn't love me, because why would this happen to me? Like, makes no sense. I've lived my life being a good person, and this makes no sense. And, now I have a very different view. I'm much more mature. But at that time, at that age, that's how it felt. So.
And in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl would ask you, what's the blessing about?
Oh, now I always look for opportunity. Now it's like, okay, this terrible thing, what is the opportunity here? And you're right. What can I be grateful for? What can I learn? I like automatically now, what's the opportunity? That I automatically do that now in a crisis. And that really does help me be more happy.
And so getting well from depression there's physical causes that we can see on scans often. There's psychological causes. And another physical cause for you that most people just aren't even aware of is your microbiome got damaged when you were a child because of the chronic stress.
And the chronic antibiotics.
And the chronic antibiotics led to changing the bug population in your gut. I know it sounds weird. That when that happens, chronic antibiotics in children lead to a heightened risk of anxiety and depression. And nobody's talking about that. I mean, it's all over the scientific literature, but most doctors aren't thinking, I have to get your gut right. And I'm sure the resident didn't talk to you about that at all.
He literally asked me what was happening, how I felt, and then wrote me a prescription.
And then went next.
And then doubled my dose.
Because that's how psychiatrists make money.
When I told him it wasn't working, he doubled my dose.
And that's happiness occurs in those four circles. So in our challenge, we talk about what's the biology of happiness, and it's good activity in your frontal lobes. What's the psychology of happening? It's positivity bias trainings. Notice what you like more than what you don't like. It's social, which is why our relationship is so important in the relationships I have with my team and with my extended family. And spiritual is believing my life has value, meaning, and I live my purpose with God, with the planet, with the past, which is my dad and my grandfather, and with the future, which is why I love spending time with my grandchildren. So how about for you? What is it that you can do biologically? Just do one thing. I made you a shake this morning. And I went to physical therapy. Working out my shoulder and my neck was so helpful. Psychologically, socially, spiritually, just one simple thing every day will increase your level of happiness. The new book, The Neuroscience of Depression, makes me happy. So many ways. Stay with us.
At Amen Clinics, we're creating a revolution in psychiatry. All other medical specialists look at the organ they treat before they treat it, but most psychiatrists never look and end up guessing based on whatever symptoms you tell them. But how do you know unless you look? Brain SPECT imaging gives us a new way to look at your brain, to understand and treat your symptoms so you can ultimately know what is going on and feel better.
Welcome back. We are still in our happiness challenge, and we are going to answer questions in this episode.
And I have a review from Brent C6. Thank you. Truly great information. Thank you very much for sharing all of your information. Very inspirational and motivating to take better care of myself. And then one from Drock 127. So happy to have found this podcast. There is so much good information from Dr. Daniel and Tana Amen in each episode. I need to listen more than once. Thank you.
That's awesome.
All right. So one of the questions we got was, what is happiness?
So is it a feeling? Is it an action? Is it a habit? I actually think it's all three.
Absolutely.
It's also
So
brain
it's a
chemistry.
positive feeling. And I've been thinking about this concept that pleasure is the enemy of happiness. Because with pleasure, it'll release dopamine, and a little bit of pleasure, holding hands, looking at you, being affectionate. That's great. But if you're always waiting, like with new love,
Yeah.
like I'm waiting for the wow, for the cocaine moment, well, that'll never last. In fact, those moments wear out the pleasure centers of the brain. And I talk about dripping dopamine, dump dopamine. Because when you jump out of a plane or write a best-selling book, pornography, cocaine, marijuana, alcohol, you don't have any dopamine left afterwards. And so you always want to protect your pleasure centers. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have pleasure, but you want to be careful with it and really notice more the micro moments of happiness. Like,
especially when you're young.
Well, no matter what age, I think it's important.
But don't you think our youth today is creating this almost a culture of like needing more and wearing out those pleasure centers younger and younger?
Well, I think all generations, but now because of social media, we just interviewed Jeff Wittick, who's a young YouTube star, and he said they just had to keep pushing the videos they made, and he ended up on an excavator in a lake going around at 60 miles an hour and ended up slamming into the metal arm of the excavator and fractured 7 bones in his skull. And it was a mess and had a significant brain injury that we're working on repairing, all for the lie of more, that more will make me happy. And when they asked the richest people in the world, those people who had 5 million and up, well, what would make them twice as happy? And they said twice as much money.
Really?
Yeah.
That surprises me.
And I guarantee you that's not going to make you twice.
No, I'm actually surprised by that.
And whenever we decide to do something, I'm always thinking, is this going to make me happier? Or am I doing this because of what other people might think of me? And like for me, because of my brain type, I have the balanced brain type. I just love routine.
I do too. We both like routine.
The walks. I love being with you. I love
like our kids make fun
patients. Of us. I love my life.
Yeah.
And jumping out of an airplane would, quite frankly, make me miserable. It's like, why would you do that? When I was in the Army and I had the opportunity to join the 101st Airborne. I'm like, and why would anyone jump out of a perfectly
Okay,
good
now I
airplane?
can't say I wouldn't have done that. I would have done that. But at this stage in my life, I like routine. Yeah. So
another question that someone wrote in is, what are the enemies of happiness?
well, we just mentioned one, too much pleasure, like overstimulation of pleasure is one.
So,
What about head injuries?
enemy of
Yeah.
happiness? The NFL study I did showed NFL players had 4 times the level of depression as the general population. So, those of us that played football, loved football, but weren't good enough, that's a blessing. I remember, because I was a backup quarterback in high school. I just remember being so grateful for that when I did my NFL work, because if I was good enough, that means I would have been hit in the head so much more and likely wouldn't be as happy now.
What about hormone imbalances?
Which is an epidemic. Did you see that study recently of boys who were exposed to environmental toxins had less fertility and even smaller genital size? That's horrifying. So toxic load can go with unhappiness. Being overweight, people, say fat and happy. It's like, no, it's fat and unhappy, because the fat on your body stores toxins, increases inflammation,
Increases pain,
turns healthy testosterone's involved in making you happy, into unhealthy cancer-promoting forms of estrogen, and lowers blood flow to your frontal lobes. I did a study with NFL players, same position. One person was overweight, one person was healthy weight. The overweight group, significantly lower blood flow in the front part of the brain. So, too much pleasure. Physical, any of the Bright Minds risk factors that we talk about a lot. If you don't sleep, you're more likely to be unhappy. I told you I had a nightmare last night. It's like, look, I rarely.
Oh, if I'm short on like a half an hour of sleep,
And I was up like at 4:00, and I knew I wasn't going back to sleep. My brain was short circuiting, not quite sure why.
Yeah.
And and days I don't sleep, I know I actually have to protect myself and not make big decisions. And if I'm irritated, not just say the first thing I think. I just become a little bit more watchful.
Do you remember, this happened about a week ago, we had a pretty big decision to make, and I woke up at 2:30 in the morning, because that's what happens to me, like lists in my head and thinking, and the mouse on the wheel. And so the next day was one of those days where a topic came up, and we almost got into an argument, and we stopped. And I went, you know what, we cannot talk about this today, because I had not slept. And so that's a really good tip. I mean, when you talk about the opposite or the enemies of happiness, you need to know when, like having enough knowledge and enough discipline to know when not to talk about things. Because lack of sleep will get you into big trouble really fast. Because if I don't sleep, you don't have the discipline then, or the ability to even put the brakes on saying certain things.
And taking time out,
Yeah.
like you did, so helpful. If you know things aren't going to go in the right direction, now don't stonewall. Stonewall is where you refuse to talk about it. And that's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to John Gottman, a relationship psychologist who's just brilliant.
But saying,
but
we
being
can't
able
talk about this now, let's talk about it tomorrow because I haven't slept. That's important.
So insightful. So lack of sleep is an enemy of unhappiness. And if you're with a person who worries, who sort of holds grudges, who tends to say no, take them on a long walk. And about 10 minutes into the walk, you can bring up what you're concerned about. And they're just more likely to be flexible with you. So an enemy of happiness is not knowing someone's brain type and knowing what to do specifically for them. Well, we hope this has been helpful for you. We certainly get happy if we're helpful. Leave us a comment, question, or review. That's how you can make us happy. Share whatever you learned today, like the enemies of happiness. I think we should do a blog on that. And we'll see you next week. Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're interested in coming to Amen Clinics, use the code PODCAST10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.